tension, or I do have the noise gate, I didn't bring it. We'll talk about that, and then distortion, like I said, I brought a few examples. So we'll see how far we get. All right, so volume pedal. What is it? It's quite simply the same as your volume control in a guitar. It's basically, it's a pot. It's a pot hooked to a thing that you can control with your foot. So you've got a simple voltage divider, and then typically you've got a rack that's tied to this treadle pedal, and you've got a linear pot that is moved, that as the rack moves past it, it turns the pot. So that's kind of your standard volume pedal. This particular one is a Rolls RFX. This one uses a linear, so it's like a fader, and so it's just got a lever that moves the fader. The Boss one tends to use a lever that moves the pot directly. It's tied directly to it. And then you get to Morley's. Morley passive ones have, and Ernie Balls have a, you know what a tuner string is? You look inside an old analog radio, right, where you tune the knob and it's got that bar that moves across the dial to tell you where you are. Well, if you look inside that, you'll see it's got wax string wrapped around a whole bunch of things. So when you tune that knob, it moves the bar linearly. Well, that's how like an Ernie Ball volume pedal works. It has a piece of string tied to one end of the treadle, and the same string tied to the other with a tensioning spring, and it's wrapped around the pot. So when you move it here, that moves the string. So it's all just physical ways. And then you get to like active designs, which can impart gain and come in all different varieties. Okay. So an example, or the benefit of using they say, well, you got the volume on the guitar, why do you need this extra volume at your feet? And there are a couple of good reasons. One that I like to do, I usually keep one at the end of my bass board. So I drive my bass at like, 75–80% volume into my pedals. And then after the pedals, I have this master volume control. So like the bass overdrive I use is very picky on where the bass is set as far as its output. So this way I have an output, a final master level I can control with my foot while I'm playing that will allow me to change the level and amplitude while I'm playing, but not affect the tone that comes from driving my bass distortion at a different volume. The other thing it's really great for are swells. And if this works, I think I've got the linking working in. You hear the guitar where it's kind of got this string sound where it keeps coming in. That's the swell. Let me. Is your speaker, is it wet? Is that dripping some?
I think there's water dripping off the speaker. The one you're holding right now, right there.
You're right. I have no idea. Well, let's hope they still work. You can hear, he goes a little nuts with the swelling here at the end. And you can do that with the guitar too. And how well you can do it depends in at least some small part about the type of guitar and where the volume knob is. Like a Strat, the volume knob is very close and makes it very easy to do that kind of swelling with the knob as opposed to using a foot pedal. I find it easy. Right? So
Can you also use it to, like, if you split like your signal and put it into like a pedal and then just like a normal groove and sort of fade in an effect?
Yeah, you could do that. You could also
rather fade between.
What you could do is if you split it, you ran through a bunch of effects and then use the volume before a passive combiner. You could do or an active mixer. Yeah, you can do that too. You could do that. One of the designs I was working on at some point is to actively do an active one. I don't know if I've told you about the pan pedal I built for a friend. It uses the Orban, I don't know if I can put it in here, but he uses the Orban pan circuitry, which is the same as like a left-right knob in a mixer. It does an active pan. And you can use that circuit in one variation is good to do as a mixer pedal. So that would be a great way that you would have, you know, if you've got two effects change or a clean and a regular, you put them both into this and you'd have one output. It would be the proper blending.
So you just use the stereo cable as just basically two lines.
Yeah, you know, there are different ways you can do it. You can do it with the volume. The nice thing about the Orban circuit is you have constant power output. So if you're doing a blend, that's the circuit you use. It's called ORBAN. I think that was the designer. It's like this classic circuit. And there's some good articles about that online. I don't know if I can reference it. Okay, so again, those are the swells. Okay, so again, swell is a foot control. Now, that's just a change in amplitude based on your foot position. We look at tremolo, and this is a change in amplitude based on something else. So, well, what's the something else? Something else we usually talk about is the LFO. The LFO just means low frequency oscillator. So all you're doing is multiplying, you know, in mathematical terms, you're multiplying your input by this LFO. You know, in practical terms, there are a number of ways of doing it. Tube amps do it by adjusting bias or through an optocoupler. Pedals usually use an octocoupler. The tremolo I brought in uses, well, it's all digital. So everything's digitized and whatever it does digitally. You can also phase the LFOs to get a stereo effect. You can have it so that one LFO, you know, you have stereo tremolo, one's a little off than the other. And these graphs show the LFO for sinusoidal modulation and triangular modulation. You can also have square modulation. And those are, the interesting thing to note here, that as I broke the rule I told you about, this is shown in the linear axis, right? This is a linear plot. So the sine modulation we're seeing is a sine wave linear. So what you're hearing is a log of the sine wave. So it's kind of interesting to think about that. Everybody talks about sinusoidal as a smoother one, but it's not even really sinusoidal if you think in decimal. So some examples with a more traditional sinusoidal tube amp. So that's kind of a nice tube amp. This is a Tony Conwell. And then Refugee by U2. You hear it's not as pronounced. The first one's a little more pronounced. But it's definitely there. And then probably the most extreme example I can think of is the Boulevard Broken Free. And that is a very hard, choppy tremolo. And my understanding of that is that that wasn't actually done with a tremolo effects box. But you know, if you look at any of these software recording packages, you can draw faders on there. So that, you know, instead of trying to control the levels of everything on the fly, you draw a fader line that says what is your amplitude as it goes by, and you do that, you build that up over multiple passes so that when you final mix down, it's all recorded. Well, one of the things you can do too is, besides draw straight lines, is you can actually get the program to draw a square wave for you. So you tell it the tempo. So my understanding is that hard square wave tremolo is actually done by drawing fader lines in Pro Tools. You know, that's how they did it. So all different variations. Now, one of the things I'm not mentioning here is there are certain artifacts, and a lot of people dwell on the details, and those artifacts are why some people favor opto versus bias tremolo, and that's why that digital pedal has 3 different modulation choices. Because there are subtle differences, there are tonal differences that you don't see, you know, from this simple multiplier, but they do exist. Okay, here's another example of a totally different kind of tremolo, and I wanted to mention this one just because this is another one from my student days. There's a place on our First Avenue called First Flight Music, At one point, they had